In this video, we're going to cover off the reasons to be bullish, the reasons that the charts give us that great impression right now, the reason that it looks as though higher prices are coming across the board, the reason it looks as though alts are still yet to have this second win rally, and overall the psychology in the market. But here we go. Let's get straight into the reasons why we should be so bullish in this market. Okay, we'll start off with kind of like just a wider view of the market, and we're going to be using charts for the purposes of the discussion today. And we're going to be looking at the higher time frames, specifically some prior examples of BTC and the prior examples in which our cycles have typically run in crypto. So what we've got on the BTC side of things is we've got a situation where obviously I'm going to be using the RSI for the discussions here. In every former high on Bitcoin, in every former cycle top, what we have seen is we have seen the presence of bearish indications on the higher time frame. Okay, if we go back into this Coinbase chart here, we get a little bit more price history through here. Each time that BTC has begun its topping process, we have seen significant reasons to do so based on the technicals that have been displayed. And so like we can see here on the BTC chart, during this cycle high here in 21, we saw the presence of the bearish divergences through the highs. So we started to diverge here. And then on the 3-day as well, we started to diverge between these highs here, basically just losing momentum all the way through these highs until eventually we get the big correction through this zone here. We get exactly the same through this top here. So when we take the highs, we get this bearish 3-day divergence through the highs, okay, here and then here. And we then correct as a result of it. Now, where we are in terms of BTC, and we'll cover off alts in a second, but where we are on BTC is a situation where none of those bearish indications, none of those bearish technical signals are actually present in the market. There's nothing that gives us that kind of end of cycle feel from a technical perspective. And obviously this has been a big kind of discussion point on the social side of things over the course of the last week, since Trump has launched the meme coin, since Melania has launched the meme coin, since we've had the inauguration and the failure to mention crypto. I mean, which is fucked that he would even mention that during an inauguration speech anyway. But there's been this kind of, rampant discussion online on whether or not we've seen a top just because of the situation that we're currently faced with. Now, what I'm trying to do, without getting too drawn into that side of the discussions, is make the argument from a technical perspective. And so simply looking at the technicals, and we'll cover off a little bit more of the psychology towards the end of this video, but right now, just the technical side. So we don't really see anything that would support that top narrative from the market perspective. Now, certainly if BTC follows similar cycle paths to what it has done previously, where we get, a situation where BTC moves into these bearish divergence scenarios, specifically 3-day weekly timeframes, and the market starts its correction from there. Now, we're not seeing that as it stands on BTC. We're actually seeing a situation where it looks far more likely we're about to make our resolution to the upside and more strongly break away from this zone. I think from here, we've got a situation where we get a weekly close above this high and things start to look really good here on BTC, making this expansion leg and heading towards 125,000. If we start to fail this weekly, I think that then it's likely that we stay probably, within this sort of region that we are here. And we already know about the reaction kind of sub 93, and we just stay in this consolidation region a little bit longer. But right now, RSI, awesome oscillator, no indication that there are any bearish signals on the higher time frame, which are ideally the signals that we're looking for to exit positions in terms of cycle tops or look at kind of scaling out of our spot exposure. And we're just simply not seeing any of that yet. And that's just on the BTC side of things. Now, we know BTC has been the stronger market. We know that it has had the strength. We know that BTC DOM has been, kind of rampaging the upside. And the alt discussion is like a little bit more nuanced, but largely at the way it sets up right now, it looks as though it's following a very similar path to what we experienced in prior cycles. Now, this is obviously me taking a bit of a stab in terms of future projections of the way the market's going to look. But to me, it looks as though the market is setting up very similarly to that. And we'll go over to ETH to kind of, have the discussion and the thought process there, and look into, what I mean by that. And we can start with a clean chart through here. Now, from the ETH side of things, yes, we know huge underperformer. Yes, we know, subject of narrative and discussion and capitulation from the .ETHs in on the social side of things at the moment. But higher time frame, again, the chart from a technical perspective sets up incredibly well. This is a very simple and easy chart from a higher time frame perspective. What we have through here is we've got our RSI 50 reset on the weekly. This is a huge signal in itself for trending markets. We've got the fresh high that was made by ETH here. We're now doing the correction through here. I've got to be very careful with what I'm drawing here. And this RSI 50 level here, nice and reset, ready to try and impulse the upside. It looks as though we're in a position where I would suggest that ETH is probably going to take a bit of a lead here. Again, we know that Q1 potentially has some bullish factors for ETH. We know that kind of ETF staking decisions are underway and potentially closer than we think. And ETH, from a technical perspective, once again, sets up incredibly well. It's a super easy, simple chart. There's no signs here that this is anything bearish. When we're kind of engaged in the narrative every day on Twitter and we're locked into all that negative discussion, I think it can portray that the markets are in a worse shape than they actually are. Whereas, as I said, set up right here, right now, ETH is in a really strong, really clean, higher time frame setup, and we would be calling out for this under any other conditions. Right? If we didn't have all of that psychology and bullshit going on in our heads, we'd be crying out for a setup that looked like this. And so, for me, ETH, very, very solid position. And then we go over to Sol, and we'll cover off those three, and then we'll do a little bit of discussion on kind of the psychology side. And Sol is very, very similar to that, except it's a week ahead of where ETH is, or at least an impulse ahead of where ETH is. And what I mean by that is that Sol has had its RSI 50 here. Okay, this is the RSI 50 zone. And then Sol has actually had its impulse away from this in terms of trend continuation. So what we're seeing on Sol is that we're actually starting to now break this RSI 50 retest. We're now starting to push to the upside. And again, there are no bearish factors in here. There's no bearish signals, no bearish divergences. There's no loss of momentum. And we would be looking for continuation on this market. So there's nothing here that suggests to us across BTC, Sol, and ETH that there should be any discussions of a top being formed in this market. BTC is in the best position. BTC is in the most extended position, but it has no bearish signals. It has no bearish technicals on the higher time frame. It looks as though it's a continuation market, and at worst, it looks as though it's a consolidation market with a failure to close above that weekly high. We then get ETH. RSI 50 level, nice and clean, nice and reset, hasn't impulsed away, but is still in a very strong higher time frame bullish position. And then we've got Sol, RSI 50 reset, really strong higher time frame position, but it has started to impulse away. So we've now started to see that weekly pushes into the highs, into fresh all-time highs, and starting to make that move to the upside. I think to be having conversations about tops being in is simply the result of spending too much time on Twitter. I think it's simply the result of spending too much time browsing social media instead of looking at what the simplicity of the charts is presenting for you. And even when we consider the Twitter narrative and the Twitter psychology, there is another side to that. There's plenty of people presenting the top is in argument. There's plenty of people presenting the reasons why the top isn't in. In this market, you have to keep things simple. The simplest thing that we know for right now is the technicals for those markets on the higher time frame look incredibly good. They look very, very strong. And if it came without all of this psychology going on and all this bullshit sharing on the social channels, we would be loving the way that these charts looked on the higher time frame. The other side of this, and again, in the efforts of keeping things simple, is we now have a government that is pro-crypto. We now have a president that is pro-crypto. We now have a president that is launching meme coins. We have now had one of the biggest onboarding events for on-chain users that we've seen ever in the history of crypto. And overall, this market is positioned for momentum. It's positioned for upside. Sometimes we need to cut through and ignore all of the stuff we're reading. Whenever we're kind of like locked into Twitter and we're spending way too much time, looking at things on Twitter and engaging and absorbing all of that information, whether consciously or subconsciously, it can absolutely ruin the simplicity of the way this market is setting up. So when you don't read all of these kind of conspiracy theories for why the market is in a bad position, why the meme coin launch is bearish for the market, and you instead focus on the simplicity of onboarding new users, pro-crypto space now in the US with a push for innovation, growth, getting a foothold in terms of the global market, and you combine that with the simplicity of some charts that look in incredibly strong positions, especially on the higher time frames, you have a situation where it just looks as though everything's going to go higher. And so from my perspective, higher on everything. Higher time frames look great. Send it all higher. Freeze everybody out who thought the top was in. Send ETH higher. Make those .ETHs regret taking it out of their name. But right now, the market is primed. It looks so good on the higher time frame. And you really want to be in a position now where you're not going to miss out on this because you spent too much time browsing social media instead. Focus on the simple things.